People at this conference who are working against climate change right now, they have a lot to be happy about this year. You know, we wanted cheap solar, we got cheap solar. We wanted better wind, we got better wind. We wanted to wean ourselves off of coal, and lo and behold, coal is basically being run out of town. We wanted a president who would at least talk about climate change occasionally, and we got Barack Obama. Just last week, fuel efficiency. We have cars on the road today with better fuel efficiency than I think anyone could have imagined 10 years ago. And then just last week, Secretary of State John Kerry said that we are on track to make our Copenhagen commitments of reducing emissions by 17% by the year 2020. I think that bears repeating. The United States of America, the world's biggest consumer of just about anything, is on track to reduce emissions by 17%, and that's a fairly remarkable development. On the other hand, last week we heard from the IPCC, the world's most respected collection of climate scientists, and they basically told us that we are in as dire a situation as we have ever been. We are still well on track to self-destruction, and it's true. And then similarly, the U.S. climate assessment, which breaks down the predictions for climate change per region across the United States, has basically told us that the kind of catastrophic flooding that we saw recently in Colorado, the kinds of tidal damage that caused $50 billion with Hurricane Sandy in New York, the wildfires and drought that ravaged much of the United States last year, those are things that we can kind of expect as part of the new normal. I'm Tom Randall. I am the deputy editor of sustainability at Bloomberg News. When I started that project with my colleague Eric Roston 2 years ago, getting a little feedback here.
There is some feedback.
When I started that project with Eric Roston 2 years ago, you know, the first question we got is basically, what is sustainability? But the second question we got is, you know, where are we with that? Like, are things getting better? Are things getting better? And 2 years later, I still don't have good answers to those questions, but fortunately today I don't have to answer those questions because we have Kate Gordon here with us. Kate is the Vice President of Energy and Climate at Next Generation, a think tank in California. Prior to that, she had a similar role at the Center for American Progress in Washington, and I think I can honestly say that Kate has seen more of the inside fight for politics and policy for climate change than most of the people in this room could stomach. So I think Kate knows what works in Washington, what doesn't work in Washington, and these days, most importantly, how to get things done without the help of Washington. So Kate Gordon, thanks for being here with us.
Thanks, Tom.
You know, I want to just jump right in here. How did we get to this state in climate science and climate policy that we are in today? From where I stand, you know, climate science should be an issue of physics. It's how much energy comes into the atmosphere, how much is absorbed by the Earth, and how much is caught by this changing atmosphere. But somehow it's become this hyper-partisan issue. How did we get into this mess?
Well, I think there's a lot of answers to that. First of all, hi, everybody. It's great to be here and see some familiar faces. I think when I was at the Center for American Progress, we had a lot of people come and talk to us from Europe, and every time a European would come and meet with me, he or she would say, how are you guys not starting with the understanding of climate change? Why is it that you haven't come to an understanding in this country? Why do you have to keep going backward with the conversation? And I think there's a lot of different reasons for that, but lately I've been thinking that we made a fundamental mistake, you know, over the last 10 years. If you think about the last 10, 15 years of this debate, we've really shifted in the justification for sort of an energy transformation. I think we started with, and it's partly because of facts, but we started thinking about resource scarcity, peak oil, issues around running out of resources. We got to a place where we were talking a lot more about energy security and national security and jobs. And I used to run the Apollo Alliance, so I was big into that argument. And then we really only came around to talking about climate change in a very upfront way in the last couple of years. And over the course of that period, I think we made, as I said, a fundamental mistake of sort of assuming too much. One way to think about it is to say, we had a problem statement, which was inconvenient truth. And then we had an answer to that problem, which was the Waxman-Markey bill. And we sort of didn't do the work between those two things to make anybody either think of the problem as something that they could relate to and that wasn't just overwhelming and stressful and complicated and massive. And I don't think we did the work on the solution side to really to really understand and explain and talk through the complexities of the solution and what would work in different parts of the country for different industries, for different parts of the economy. So we had a solution, we had a problem and a solution statement, both of which were kind of inaccessible. And so I don't think we got that far. I mean, when Waxman-Markey fell apart, it was like we hadn't built a movement, we hadn't done a lot of education, we hadn't come up with a lot of plan B and C solutions. And so the last couple of years have been spent doing that. And I think we've made enormous strides in the last couple of years doing that, but we probably should have been doing it the whole time.
Tell us a little bit about what you do right now. What's a day in the life at Next Generation look like?
There is no day in the life at Next Generation. So we're a think tank that was started in San Francisco a couple of years ago. We were started by Tom Steyer, who many of you have heard of, and Tom was at the time still running a hedge fund out in San Francisco called Farallon Capital, and decided that he really wanted to help fill a void he saw in California of doing policy and communications really, really well and strategically on climate and energy in the California context. So he started Next Generation for that reason. At this point, running the climate and energy team at Next Generation, I do a combination of California at the leading edge of policy. We look at things that have worked in California, making sure they work better, thinking about how to make them expand to the West, thinking about the Western region as a climate leader. So I do a lot on that, and then we also do big agenda-setting projects at the national level. And one of the biggest projects we have just started, and we just launched it last week, some of you may have read about it, is a project that actually attempts to fill in that void I just talked about between the kind of the big problem and the big solution. It's a project called Risky Business, and it's a project that I'm running that brings Tom Steyer together with Mayor Bloomberg and Hank Paulson, former Secretary of Treasury, to ask the question that they would ask if they were at a financial services company, if they were still at Goldman Sachs, where two of them were. What risk are we facing by not dealing with climate? If we were a company, we would have a risk committee asking the question of what kind of risk we're taking on by not taking action. This project is intended to ask that question. So it's really exciting, and we feel like kind of addresses these issues with the messengers and the kind of market-oriented message that makes sense to a lot of people in the United States.
It seems to me that one of the challenges in all of this is to convince people that it will benefit them to pay for these, to prevent the problems of climate change, or as much as we can, as opposed to just adapting to the situation when the time comes, putting your house on stilts or whatever it's going to take. Is this report targeted at answering that question?
Well, so the project it's interesting. I am constantly fighting a totally losing battle of trying to break down the false dichotomy between adaptation and mitigation, because I feel like if it's a big catastrophic issue, we're going to have to do both. I mean, it's your short-term response is to adapt and your long-term response is to mitigate. I mean, this is something we do all the time, and it's how we organize the project. We think about long-term catastrophic risk and how to operationalize that in our daily lives all the time. We do it with health insurance. We do it with national security threat assessments. We do it with the financial sector. We do it with agriculture. We need to be simultaneously adapting and mitigating. We need to be thinking about, what kind of crops do we change to grow today that use less water, and we need to be doing long-term solutions so that water use doesn't become as drastic as issue as it will be. So I think the project is intended, honestly, to reframe the entire conversation in terms of a kind of a risk analysis we're used to doing, and then to basically say, I'm not going to tell you how to react to that risk. I'm not going to say to you, your answer to this risk should be X. Because if you live in the Southeast and you live in the Northwest, your answers are different, and your risks are different, and your adaptation strategies are different, and your mitigation strategies are different. So what we're trying to do is basically, again, be the risk committee for the United States and say, here's what we are quantifying for you, what the risk looks like in every region of this country, and how you react to that is, should be based on your own industry, your own experiences, your own region.
I should mention that Kate and I have something very much in common, which is at the end of the day, both of our paychecks are are signed by billionaire businessmen who care very much about these issues. I work for Bloomberg, which was founded by Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and she works for and with Tom Steyer, who had a billionaire hedge fund worth $20 billion in assets.
My billionaire is worth about 12 times less than his billionaire, though. So
I'm wondering.
You win on the billionaire scale.
I'm wondering on this risky business project. You have the titans of finance involved in this project. You have Michael Bloomberg, you have Hank Paulson from Goldman Sachs and the former Treasury. I mean, your advisors, you have people like Robert Rubin and George Shultz, and you've got Tom Steyer. How does that happen? I mean, does Bloomberg like call up Tom Steyer while he's on the yacht and, you know?
Well, so Tom doesn't have a yacht. Let me just say, Tom has a 2006 Honda Hybrid, and he does not have a yacht, and he flies commercial. So
how does it come about that?
Well, you know what? It came about. It's a good question. I've been wanting to do this project for a long time, I'll admit, and I've been having and I had a really hard time getting a traditional environmental funder to fund it. The big foundations were like, why aren't you talking about solutions? Why aren't you talking about, there was a very strong sort of, you guys, any of you in the audience who get funding from a funder, you know that there's sort of, they have fads and trends, and they sort of go down whichever path each year. And it would never quite fit in. And when I started working for Tom, I came to him with it, and he totally got it right away because this is how he was used to making decisions as an investor. So actually what happened was that he went to Mayor Bloomberg. He and I together went to Mayor Bloomberg and pitched the project, and then Mayor Bloomberg called Hank Paulson. And Tom used to work for Bob Rubin at Goldman, so we called Bob. I mean, it was all very incestuous and sort of elite and high level, which is actually the point of the project. The project is aimed at elite, high level, influencers in very particular sectors. It's a very, very specific strategy of specific messengers and messages. It's not a populist project. So that's how it happened, but I think it illustrates a bigger point and something that I've been thinking about a lot, which is these new billionaires getting involved in funding and getting involved in these social issues. It's very interesting because we're moving from the foundation world. Most of those big foundations have boards that are family boards. The original person who made all the money has died a long time ago. The boards are often pretty conservative. There's different ways they approach issues. And they do very intense strategic planning and long-term thinking and big grants, if you're lucky, big grants over multiple years. These new guys, Bloomberg and Steyer are good examples of it, but there are others, are treating this more like a business or like an investment proposition. They're fast. They make decisions quickly, they're nimble, they're willing to fund things that may not work. They're willing to throw something at the wall and see if it sticks. They're willing to fund politics, which both of them do, 501c4 direct political funding, which the big foundations don't do. So I think it's a really interesting new world in a way where we might be breaking out a little bit of this sort of traditional funder grantee model and into something that's a little more responsive and looks a little bit more like the current media and political environment.
Well, let me come at that at a kind of a different angle. I think the Koch brothers and Rupert Murdoch see this as a business opportunity too, right. In the opposite
Another
way.
good example.
And those are the people that we're all familiar with, and I think we're now seeing a new generation of these big investors. And I think, it's funny what you said about the yacht. I think conspicuous consumption used to be pretty common with the America's uber wealthy, and I think that's kind of faded. It's less than what you might think, and I think now the race is on to have the smartest think tank, the most influential think tank with the most brilliant people like Kate, and I think it's an interesting phenomenon because on the one hand, if you have a billionaire who is investing to make social change that's in line with your values, one in America might call that a brilliant philanthropist. But if they're not in line with your values, it's a plutocrat who is corrupting democracy. So I'm just wondering if this new influx of billionaires on one side to counter the billionaires on the other side, I mean, are we further accentuating the partisan kind of divide and conversation in this country and this idea that the money is controlling the conversation?
It's a great question. We got that question a lot recently with Tom because Tom was involved in Proposition 39 in California, which is a ballot proposition, so direct democracy funded by a billionaire. So you could certainly argue that that's a plutocratic approach to politics. And I think it was a great proposition, but yeah, we get this question a lot. It's interesting. What's interesting to me about how this works in reality is that both of our bosses are much less partisan in the way they're spending the money than you would imagine. So the Risky Business Project is a very bipartisan project and pretty conservative. I mean, we're taking a very conservative economic approach to how we calculate risk. We're not even including, you know, extreme weather disasters that have a kind of like a 50% connection to climate change. We're only going for the really obvious connection ones. We have George Shultz involved, we have Ed Paulson involved, we've got, I can't tell everybody the full list of what we're calling the risk committee members, but we have some, what you might call real Republicans. You know, we have very, very interesting mix of people. And Tom, I don't think a lot of people would have done that, but it's Tom actually takes that approach to finances and investment, so that's why we're doing it. You know, Mayor Bloomberg has made a lot of decisions that aren't particularly partisan. They're sort of his own values. So it's an interesting question because I'm not sure if it breaks down on the same lines as other partisan politics, but it's certainly something to watch out for. I mean, if we get into a kind of democracy, which is people fighting it out who have the biggest wallets, that's certainly a matter of concern.
Let's talk about some of the other things that your billionaire is up to. He's started to get involved in some elections in the United States, right? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then also, I know the Keystone issue he's become heavily involved in, and has kind of joined up with Bill McKibben, and has put out some videos. Maybe you could just give us a little background about both of those issues.
And then we have the videos to show you. So Tom has taken, just for folks who don't, it's really, really hard to understand actually either the Bloomberg ecosystem or the Steyer ecosystem from the outside, but we are, Next Generation is one think tank, we're a single organization. We do policy and communications, we're a 501c3. We have a partner organization that's a 501c4, so it's able to do direct political work, which is called Next Gen Climate Action. And Next Gen Climate Action is behind what you've all seen in the news, the Markey race, the Cuccinelli race, the Keystone ads, a lot of the very, very direct political stuff. We also have an organization that Tom founded called Advanced Energy Economy, which is a business network, which is specifically designed to get business voices much stronger behind a clean energy transformation. So Tom really has a three-part approach. It's really business, politics, policy, with all of us representing different pieces of that. He decided to get involved in the politics, you know, in large part, and it's interesting, I agree with this, even though my entire background on this issue has been about solutions and policy. I mean, that's my whole orientation on this issue, is what's the solution, how do we get there? But Tom and I, you know, I increasingly am starting to feel, and a lot of us are starting to feel like we know the policies. I mean, I could probably take every one of you in this room aside and ask you what the 10 things are we need to do in the policy arena to move forward our climate and energy agenda, and you'd all say the same thing. You'd all say, we need a price on carbon, we need a cap on carbon, we need, you know, strong financing policies to move these things forward, we need to get rid of subsidies. You'd say the same basic things. So the question isn't what are the right policies. For us and our overall strategy, it's what's the right way to talk about this stuff, but also what are the right politics, and how do you actually get people in power who believe in this stuff and want to move it.
Great. I'm going to, so one of the things that Tom has done is, in the Keystone fight, is, I don't know if you saw some of the commercials that have come out on the pro-Keystone side. They started several months ago, funded in large part by the American Petroleum Institute and some other interests on that side. Tom started putting out some videos, I guess this is about a month ago now. There were a series of 4 videos, and I believe he was putting them out during the Sunday morning talk shows, right? So this is right when the politicians are out front talking, and so these commercials were timed to really put pressure on them. So we'll show 1 or 2 of these.
Talk about TransCanada's proposal to build the Keystone XL pipeline through America's heartland. But sometimes Washington politics gets in the way of real-world facts. So we're taking a closer look at Keystone over the next 4 weeks. I'm Tom Steyer. I evaluate investments and help companies grow. Being successful means learning the difference between a good investment and a bad deal. Today, we look at who profits if Keystone is built. Here's a hint: it's not America. We're on the Gulf Coast near one of the largest refineries in the world, owned by Royal Dutch Shell and Saudi Refining. It's where the tar sands oil piped from Canada will be refined and loaded on ships to be sold overseas to countries like China. Here's the truth: Keystone oil will travel through America, not to America. In fact, when Congress asked TransCanada for a commitment to sell that oil here in the US, TransCanada said no. Deals have been cut, and America is cut out. Foreign oil companies will make nearly $4 billion off Keystone. And foreign countries will get more access to more oil to make more products to sell back to us, undercutting our economy and our workers. You don't have to dig deep on Keystone to see it's a bad deal for America. Next week, we head to Arkansas for that part of the story. See you there.
You want to see the next one?
You see another one? One thing I'll say while he's queuing it up is one thing I really like about these ads is that they take place in different parts of the country. So they're really intended to demonstrate that even though people keep saying this is one pipeline, this is only one part of the story, it's a part of the story that affects a lot of different regions of the country, and it really is a good microcosm of the larger set of issues we're all dealing with at this conference. So.
One thing we know for sure about oil pipelines: they corrode, they leak, they burst. 300 times a year on average, from Kalamazoo, Michigan to Mayflower, Arkansas. I'm Tom Steyer. Each week we're visiting places that know what it would mean if TransCanada is allowed to build the Keystone Pipeline through America's heartland. See, Keystone would carry 800,000 barrels of dangerous tar sands oil every day through farms, towns, and fresh water supplies. The same stuff they're dealing with here in Mayflower.
My name is Genevieve Long. I live in Mayflower, Arkansas, and I've lived here 28 years. The oil was running right through the middle of town by the elementary school. You could see chunks of the tar sands flowing through there.
Many continue to suffer from headaches and nausea, and air sampling continues to show that the carcinogen benzene remains in the air.
So how safe is Keystone? A former TransCanada inspector says Keystone XL will likely leak. We can't afford to let foreign oil companies risk our health so they can make a buck. Next week, we head west, where clean energy is creating good jobs and repowering our economy. See you there.
So what do we think? Does this move? Yeah? You know, one of the things that I thought was interesting about these videos is it's not until the fourth video that the words climate change, I think, are even mentioned. Each video takes kind of a different tack.
I'm not sure why we're getting this.
Each video kind of takes a different approach. It's you know, the risks to the country, jobs, opportunities. So it's I thought that was very interesting.
You should move your phone. It might be your phone.
Yes,
Absolutely.
we will.
Yeah.
Actually, 5 more minutes, I think we'll open it up.
We want to hear from you.
So one question that I have is about this Keystone issue. I think Keystone there's two different things going on. One is the actual issue of how much carbon is being polluted into the atmosphere, and the other is, you know, this has really been used as a way to draw a line in the sand and to start to build a movement. And I'm wondering how you feel about Keystone as the right target for both of those.
So for those of you who read, there was a profile of Tom and a story about Keystone in the New Yorker about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, that I was quoted in saying that I was not a believer 6 months ago on the Keystone strategy, and have really come around to be a believer. So I'm sort of, in some ways, I feel like I'm a test case for whether this works, you know, as an argument. And I think because I was looking at it from a very, like from the standpoint of, okay, what does it actually mean in terms of number of barrels, and will it happen anyway without the pipeline, and, you know, what does the demand look like for this oil? And, you know, I was sort of looking at it from a market and policy perspective. And I had to take a step back, and I was a tenant organizer before I got into energy and climate, and I had to take a step back and go back to my organizer days and really look at it and say, you know, climate change is so hard to get your head around as an individual. It is so hard to know what to do, especially, I mean, extreme weather is, you know, that's the big talking point right now, is sort of extreme weather. It feels very, like, I can't affect the weather. What am I supposed to do to affect the weather? You know, incredibly catastrophic stories from around the world. We feel like we're helpless. Keystone is an organizing tool that is really brilliant, because it will have an effect. It is really significant. It is the symbol of the dirtiest of the fossil fuel side of the equation. And if what we're trying to do as a country is to move to a different kind of energy and a different kind of climate, it's a symbol of a big step in the wrong direction. So I think it's incredibly important as an organizing tool. You can get your head around it, you can see it, which is what's great about these ads. You can actually see it. It affects people at a very local level, but you can also talk about it geopolitically. And so I've really come around to thinking, you know, this whole thing can't just be about moving to the good stuff. It can't just be about the right technologies and the right investments and the right financing strategies and the right policies. We actually have to address changing away from the bad stuff. And Keystone really epitomizes that, just like the coal fights do. It really epitomizes sort of the dirtiest of that side. Now, that does not mean that I think that, you know, I think it's very challenging. I think that getting rid of fossil fuels is extremely challenging and will take a long time. But this is one thing where, you know, why would we spend these kind of resources and this kind of political capital and this kind of energy on something that's a big infrastructure puzzle piece in the wrong direction?
As an organizing principle, what happens next? I mean, how does the outcome affect the kind of grassroots organizing around Keystone? If Obama approves Keystone, is that going to be a blow to the climate change movement now that it's been made a kind of line in the sand?
I mean, I think that's why it shouldn't be the only line in the sand. I mean, I do worry that it's the only line in the sand. I think we have to have a collection of strategies. Divestment is another one. We need a collection of strategies on the side of not investing in the bad stuff. And the collection of strategies has to have a whole bunch of different wins in it. I mean, any organizer will tell you, you have to have winnable issues, and you can't put everything on something that's maybe still a long shot. I'm really impressed with the progress that's been made on the anti-Keystone arguments, and I actually think I've moved a lot in terms of the percentage that I think it's likely that the president will approve it. I've moved from very likely to less likely.
Yeah.
But I moved to about 65%
65%.
approved. Yeah, that's where I am right now. Because if you take a step back and you're the president, I mean, this is not an easy decision for him at all. It's a bunch of incredibly big interests on both sides. It's a big economic argument. It's a big moral argument. It's a very tough decision. Yes, he knew what he was getting into. He was getting into a job where he has to make tough decisions. But there's a reason he's delaying and delaying and delaying, because nothing he does is going to work for him on this. So I think it's a very, very tough decision. But I also think we have to diversify our strategy. But you have to have a vision on that side that says, all of these different puzzle pieces are part of the sort of saying no to the bad stuff, and we need to get all the wins we can on that side.
So Kate thinks that the president will approve Keystone. I'm curious about what the audience thinks. Can I see some hands if you think he will approve it? And,
interesting. And
people who think he won't approve it. Maybe
I should say
maybe
I went
65%.
I went from 95% to 65% in the last 5 months. So this is a big change.
I think it looks like they kind of agree with you. I thought in the turnout. So maybe you could give us a quick Obama report card. You've been in Washington throughout much of his administration. Like what kind of grade do you give him?
Oh, that's a very hard question.
On climate issues.
No pressure.
I know, right? And this is like being podcast too. So this is. That's a really hard question. I know you know that. I honestly, I wish that he was showing more spine, obviously. I mean, I don't think that you can simultaneously have a climate change agenda and an all of the above agenda. I just don't think those two things work together. They're fundamentally at odds with each other, and they're talked about in the same sentences, and it makes no sense. So I think that is an issue. There's no vision for how you get to the climate change agenda, but he doesn't have the political backing to have an agenda. I mean, he is out there without Congress, without a strong business community, without a strong backing from many of his donors to make the right decisions on this. So I do think that when he says, you have to push me to do this, I think he's right. We have to set up a context in which he can make the hard decisions. And I hope he will if we set up that context. But it's, you know, the climate change speech was really, it was a speech to us in this room in a lot of ways. It was really a speech to the base. And I think it made a lot of us feel like he was paying attention, which is good. But honestly, the biggest and most important thing in that speech actually got the least attention, and that was getting the World Bank to stop investing in coal plants around the world. That was a very big deal, and a big change in policy, and a little under the radar. So that kind of thing gives me some hope, because slipping that kind of thing in, that's actually going to make a big difference to a lot of developing countries. And I think that if we can keep finding those places where he can show leadership, where we can show that it's working, where we all can make the case that it's not going to ruin the economy, and where we get unusual messengers coming from both above and below, both the elites and also sort of bottom-up unusual messengers to make this case, I think we can give him the backing he needs. But it's a mixed report card.
What's the single most important thing that he's done?
Fuel standards, I think.
And what's the biggest missed opportunity?
Well, we would never have gotten Waxman-Markey, so I'm not going to go down that path of saying if we hadn't done healthcare, because we wouldn't have gotten Waxman-Markey. I mean, I was there right in the middle of it. It wasn't going to happen. We didn't have the right political context for it. So I don't think that was a failure of the president, although a lot of people would probably pick that. Single biggest missed opportunity, I am shocked that he hasn't done more on energy efficiency. I mean, I think it's been at various points throughout his administration super bipartisan, and there's been moments where I think we could have gotten something Homestar for anyone who followed that. Getting the Fair Housing Administration to Better Housing Administration to do PACE. I mean, there's things he could have done on efficiency that would have made a big, big difference in this country that didn't happen. He's got a big opportunity coming up with existing power plants, so we'll have to see how that one goes.
So in just a few minutes, I'd like to open this up to a few questions from the audience, so get your thinking caps on. But first, I want to play a little game that I'm going to call Kate's Quick Take, or actually we should call it Kate's Cliff Notes, which is the name of her blog, which should really...
I do have a blog.
You should really check it out.
To my blog.
It's very good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I would like a very short answer. I would like to say one word, but I hate it when you have one-word answers. So maybe one word to a sentence.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm ready. This is like that wait, don't tell me thing
yes.
on NPR.
So, except less funny.
I will try to be funny.
Carbon offsets. When you see companies like FedEx advertising carbon neutral shipping because they buy carbon offsets, gimmick or game changer?
Neither. Total cop-out answer. I think in the, this goes back to my political context. In the political context we're in, I'm really glad people are doing carbon offsets. We don't have a price on carbon, people. Like, we don't have a cap on carbon. What are you supposed to be offsetting?
That's two sentences.
So it's important. It is not a game changer.
Okay. Will solar replace granite countertops as a standard of quality in new homes?
I thought Corian was the big, yes.
Fracking, good or bad for the environment?
Oh my God, really? Fracking done the way it's done today, fracking done with full environmental quality. I mean, you can do fracking right.
Fracking as it will be done starting now to the next, till
So
infinity.
Totally unpopular opinion here, but I cannot see, having done this work for a long time, how we get where we need to go in the next 15 years without natural gas. So fracking is not anything more than a technique. It can be done badly, it can be done well. I believe, based on recent data from University of Texas, that if their right controls and monitoring equipment are in place, you can get 99% of the methane out. I think you can do it well. We are not doing it well today. So fracking done the way it's being done today, bad. Fracking done the way it might be able to be done, okay as a short-term solution. I recognize that's unpopular.
Is Obama waging a war on coal?
Is he waging a war on coal?
Is the U.S. government waging a war on coal?
No, coal is losing an economic battle. It's not economical.
What's the best energy policy that can be pursued at the state level?
At the state level? I mean, price on carbon.
What's the best energy policy that Obama can pass by himself without Congress?
Existing power plant standards.
After the coal stuff, which he's already announced.
After the coal stuff. That he can do on his own? procurement, federal procurement, done really well. Entire federal government only buys low carbon products.
If you were 25 years old again, would you pursue the same career path in climate policy as you did?
This is a good reminder to 25-year-olds. I didn't pursue this career path at all. I mean, I was a tenant organizer, and then I went to law school, and then I went to planning school, and then I became an economic development consultant, and then I got into energy. So
the answer is
I
yes.
never pursued this career path. Yes.
Will the U.S. ever pass a tax on carbon emissions?
A tax?
Carbon tax.
Yeah, I think so.
When?
$2017.
Nice. Which country is
I'm really interested to see if anyone ever holds me to saying that.
Which country is the global leader in sustainability?
Oh, I don't know, one of those, like Sweden, something like that. One of those very small countries with massive resource problems that has to be a global leader.
Which country will be 10 years from now?
The global leader in sustainability? Probably China, because it'll have to be.
What's the craziest climate solution that just might work? What's the craziest climate solution that just might work?
Gosh, I don't know. We should open that one up. I don't know. Probably geoengineering, but I feel like I can't go there. So. Desalination. I don't know. There's like all kinds of crazy climate solutions.
What's the last book you read?
It wasn't at all related to this issue. I'm a big reader of detective thrillers, so the last book I read was the latest Lee Child book.
Nuclear energy, yes or no?
Yes, if we could figure out a way to pay for it and how to deal with the waste. How's that for offering huge barriers to nuclear energy?
Who's your biggest climate hero?
Tom Steyer, of course.
And who's the biggest climate villain?
Yeah. I think that's a really unfair question.
Okay.
Only because the businesses that we all like to villainize are doing what they do. They're doing what they do for their bottom line. I hate to call them a villain for that. There's certainly, probably the Cokes or something. There's certainly people out there doing stuff way beyond what they need to do for their bottom line. But I think we need to figure out a way to make a good business case here instead of having a villainous business case. So.
Is Tom Steyer going to run for political office?
I'll give the patented Tom Steyer answer to that. If he feels like he could make a difference by running, he'll run.
Well done.
I'm quoting.
If you get this last one, you win. Do you know any good climate jokes?
Oh, God. No, the problem with climate change is it's so depressing.
I know there was actually a panel on that yesterday on climate humor, so if anybody attended or has a good climate joke, the floor is yours. If not, I'd like to open it up for questions. Couple of ground rules. One, let's keep the questions to no more than 2 sentences, and 2, wait for the microphone to come to you.
Hi, my name is Chris Wilson. I worked for the National No Keystone XL campaign through the Texas office.
Great.
And I really appreciate the dedication Tom Steyer's and the money he's put towards these ads. But I have to ask, why is he not mentioning Keystone XL South, which is in the ground in Texas and Oklahoma? It's 95% complete. And this Keystone fight is not just about Nebraska. So I'd like to understand why he's not mentioning it, especially when he flew to Port Arthur to film this commercial, and that's ground zero for tar sands refining in Texas. Thank you.
No, that's a great question, and I would actually love your take, maybe after, on what the right action is to take there. I assume to stop it. The ads are focused. If you go through all 4 of them, you really see this at the end. They are aimed at an audience of 1, and that's the president. So they're laser focused on the president's decision, and I don't think the president can stop the southern leg at this point. Is that right?
Well, he wrote an executive order that mandated the Army Corps of Engineers to build it.
So he's not. We're not at a decision-making moment for him about the southern piece, as far as I know. So that's the ads themselves have that particular audience. but it's a great point, and he's doing a lot of stuff beyond those ads that are focused on this issue. So I will definitely take that back to him.
Another question? Yep. Can we get the microphone? Sorry.
You have to have it just because they're recording this.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah. So we deal with a lot of quote-unquote bad governments when it comes to energy, so Saudi Arabia, China. But to me, it seems like the Canadian government needs to be up there just because of what they're doing in Alberta.
Yeah.
What can we do to influence them? Because to me, as long as the oil is coming out, with or without this oil pipeline, it will get out. So what can we do?
Well, it's a great question, because actually one of the reasons Keystone is so important, and one of the things that convinced me that this fight was an important fight, was when the BC government stopped the Western pipeline. So told the Canadian government that they wouldn't allow the Western pipeline, which took away a huge alternative to Keystone. The First Nations work that's happened in Canada has taken away huge alternatives to Keystone. So as long as there's an argument on the table that it would go out anyway, it's much harder to fight it, right? I think we could support those governments for sure. I think the Canadian political system, as you probably know, is very complicated and confusing. It's a parliamentary system. It's very confusing. And the most important thing to understand about it is, and I'm half Canadian, I should say, so I
Me too.
Oh, are you? Look at that. So spend some time thinking about this. That Harper is a guy from the Keystone province, and if you look at the gross domestic product of Canada, the pipeline is essentially funding the country. So it's Canada's a resource-based economy. What it takes out of the ground and what it takes out of its forests are its economy, by and large, except for in the tourist areas. It's not easy politically for them at all. So I think the thing we can do as Americans is to support those in Canada with financially and also however we can to keep up the fights they're doing, because they're almost more important even than what we're doing. They're really important. And then I think we can, there is a way to get involved in the political process up there. I mean, we can pay more attention to it. I doubt many people know all the political parties in Canada or what the different provinces feel on this. There's a very interesting conversation going on up there about hydro. So Manitoba Hydro and Quebec Hydro are trying to fight it out with the tar sands folks to be the Canadian energy source. We have a lot of conflict in this country about big hydro, but in Canada, big hydro looks a lot better than tar sands. So I think there's things we could be doing to support a better solution for Canada, and not just saying to them, no, we want to cut off your entire source of gross domestic product, because that's just not a particularly good argument.
Anyone else?
That's a good question, though.
No. Oh, yeah, there.
Which one do you want?
Hello, David Wogan from Scientific American. Quick question. How do you see the departure of Heather Zeichel, the president's top climate advisor, affecting the president's climate change plans coming up?
Yeah, I was saying to you, I was
Just
wondering
talking about this.
I was wondering if that was going to come up. So folks who don't know or don't read E&E news religiously, Heather Zeichel's leaving the White House, just announced, although we've sort of known that was going to happen for a long time. And she's been playing a really important role, a little bit under-recognized, I think, because she's not that public. But what she's been doing is she coordinates all of the agencies in their response to the president's climate plan. So what he said in his speech was a bunch of different things, all of which are under different agency jurisdictions, and she's coordinating all those agencies. She's very good at that. I am personally worried that they won't replace that exact position. And that position is really important and has to be done by somebody who gets the agency action. But I would argue that at this point, politically, they have to replace her with somebody way more public. So I think that we need a climate champion in the White House. We don't have one right now. We don't have a Carol Browner. We don't have a Van Jones. We don't have somebody who's like a public figure who's out there, who talks about this stuff, who is the face of climate change. Different people in the White House spend different amounts of time on it, and the people who think about it every day we never see in public. So I would argue it's an opportunity, potentially, to replace her position with two different things, with a very public-facing person and then someone to do the operational agency stuff. Will they do that? It actually goes back to the earlier question. It's a big test of what the president's commitment is. What he does with those staff positions is a big test.
with Clean Edge. What's the best way to get the less progressive, large investor-owned utilities to move faster or move at all and towards more clean energy?
It's a very clean edgy question. I have a lot of hope for the utilities. My whole, the thing I actually really care about, I'm from the Midwest, so I really care about manufacturing, and a lot of the work I've done has been around clean energy manufacturing. And watching the auto companies up to and after the TARP bailout was really instructive, because it's sort of, I actually feel like the utilities are a little bit like the auto companies. So the auto companies were like, we're big, we have the market, we control it, and they were getting slowly less and less market share, and they were getting in bigger and bigger trouble, and everyone was like, no, 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 you have to do new innovative things. Prius is coming out, other people are coming out, you have to innovate. And they were like, no, we own the market. And then they went bankrupt, and then they came back and they said, oh, right, fuel economy standards could actually be really good for us, we're gonna innovate. Utilities, to me, are almost there. They are back up against a wall. They are where, let's even say, where the telecom companies were before the breakup of Ma Bell, right? They are the big centralized monopoly. But they've got First Solar coming in, or Solar City coming in, and then Mosaic coming in, Community Wind coming in, and all these new innovative solutions, microgrids, DOD is investing in this other stuff. They cannot maintain their business model. So the big question is going to be, do they do what the telecom industry did and they break off and they start competing? Or do they just hold on to their market share until they break apart? I think one of those two things will happen. I really do. I think that the innovative utilities will go toward new innovative models, and the non-innovative utilities will suffer. I have a lot more faith in the innovation of car companies and utilities today than I do in oil companies, for instance, because oil companies are not backed up against a wall. They're making historic profits doing what they're doing. So if we want companies to change and get on our side and be, leaders in this new movement, I think the utilities and the car companies are really good potential partners.
We have a question over here.
Hello, thank you. My question's about the risky business kind of effort versus top-down command and control in this part of the world, down here in Texas, yep. Louisiana, Oklahoma, maybe Wyoming. The value of the fossil fuels that we have in the industry, like the Shell refinery in Port Arthur, in addition to the resources in the ground, have a tremendous economic value, probably greater than our climate risk, even at a catastrophic projection. And so I'd be interested in your perspective of what will work down here, where we actually have the carbon. Does the risky business model affect what we do here, or is it going to have to be a top-down command and control kind of approach?
I might also mention that some of the states that you just mentioned have some of the greatest new energy resources as well, solar and wind.
That's true. That's a really good question, and it's sort of how we designed the project. Energy is inherently regional. It always has been. We have different resources. We have different approaches in different parts of the country. One of the reasons we did not take a classic cost-benefit approach in this project is because if you take the U.S. on its own, without the rest of the world, and you do a strict cost-benefit approach, we actually come out not looking so bad for a really long time. So we don't get the major effects of climate just in the United States. Except for in certain coastal communities, you can argue about this, but we don't get it as a country. Till 2050 or beyond, we're not like the Maldives, we're not like Bangladesh. If you bring those guys in, it looks a lot worse much earlier. So we took a risk approach on purpose because we wanted to get at this question of what does catastrophic risk look like, not just for the United States, but different regions of the United States. It's absolutely true that there will be pieces of that look better and worse in different parts of the country. But down here, for instance, you're gonna have massive water scarcity. So that will be, that's a piece of the climate risk that you will have to deal with. Your agricultural and ranching systems will have to deal with that. If you can figure out a way to talk about that as being partially caused by the carbon going into the atmosphere, then you have a relationship between those two things. You're like, oh, we're weighing our extractive industries against our entire tourism, ranching, and agriculture industries. These are all first of all political players in the state, and they're all different parts of the economy of the state. So I think those are the kind of questions we're trying to tease out. We're looking at results I think we're going to look at results in a range of different areas, but certainly resource scarcity is going to be one of them. So it's a great question. It kind of goes back to the Canada question. It's very hard to make these short-term political arguments when you have your entire economy is based on a certain kind of extraction, but what we're basically saying is you can't make that a long-term bet, that in the long term, the volatility is such and the risk is such that you have to diversify and you have to think about, your long-term options. Will it work? I don't know. I mean, I think it's one strategy, it's one piece of a much larger puzzle of how to work on these issues. You need local action, you need organizing, you need political movement, you need policies, you need all that stuff, but it's one piece of making that argument.
One of the things that strikes me about the space that we're in is the enormous gap of what we talk about that needs to happen and must happen and what's actually happening. Yep. And I think it's a tough thing to live with. It's this Sisyphus kind of pushing the boulder up the hill. But similarly, what you're talking about, regional versus national, similar thing going on internationally. It's almost like whatever we do in the United States, the fact is 3 billion people in this world are about to come into the middle class, and they're going to want to consume like people in the United States can consume, and who's to say that they shouldn't? So no matter what we do, that the real growth in emissions is going to come from people who are just starting to consume, on a level that's actually not even close to what we consume. So I wonder, basically nothing that we do as a country will make a huge difference if we can't get anything to happen internationally, and yet nothing's happening internationally, nothing's happening in our country level or very little. And yet you've gone to go work on the more local level in California to a large extent. Tell me a little bit about how all of those things interrelate and how we can actually make a change that has an impact when the problem itself is so huge.
It's like asking, how does everything relate to everything?
Yeah.
But I can.
How does the world work?
I will work on that. I'm just being an optimist today for whatever reason, but I'm really encouraged by the new approach happening around the international scene, actually. So we have this process that everyone's paying attention to with 192 countries, and they all have to agree, and everybody thinks they won't. So that's happening. And then, and the IPCC report, which is incredibly important, but takes months and months and months to come out. But then we have this other interesting thing happening, which is countries making deals with each other, or states making deals with each other. This interesting bilateral, multilateral, bottom-up, super disruptive approach on climate. California just signed a deal with Quebec to share a carbon market. So we now have a shared carbon market. We're talking to BC, which has a carbon tax, about how we can reconcile our cap and trade program with their carbon tax program and have some kind of a shared system. We're talking in the long term to Oregon and Washington about joining up with that. Quebec is talking to Australia, was talking to Australia. Australia was talking to the EU. It's very interesting. All of these little lines being drawn all over the globe. California is also, Governor Brown is having a meeting with a couple of the different provincial leaders in China in 2014 to talk about specific deals on environmental regulation that we can make. So I'm encouraged that we are coming at this from a totally different direction than what we used to do. I just don't think we're going to get the kind of global deal we used to get. The kind of the big UN deal. I do think that that deals made, subnational deals that work, that show strong economic potential, and that disrupt the global marketplace will be very interesting. And that's kind of where we're putting that's why I'm excited to be in California right now, because we've got this potential Western States alliance. If you take California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, which is making interesting signs about certainly great clean energy economy story and some interesting signs with Hickenlooper about a carbon market. Those 4 states plus the states in RGGI, in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, you put those together, it's 45% of US GDP. So that's a big deal.
I just want to talk very briefly about climate education. I know it's a subject that you care a lot about. A kilowatt hour, a joule, a volt, a kilocalorie, sometimes known as a calorie, 16 terawatts. I still have trouble inherently comprehending what these terms of energy mean. And I think that has to do with the way we learn about education in primary and secondary school. I know in high school, we learned about how the longbow had an impact on medieval warfare, but we barely talked about how the oil barrel had impacts modern warfare. I'm wondering, is that a problem that as a society we know how to talk in terms of inches, but we don't know how to talk we don't know what a kilowatt hour is as a society?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a problem. I'm really excited that the next generation science standards, which are getting adopted by a bunch of states, have climate change in them, have the climate science in them. That's a big, big change. But I am stunned by how little most people know about even where their electricity comes from. I wrote actually something about this not that long ago for Duke Law Journal, but I actually think that this is an issue from two different sides. We need the basic science and math and meteorological and climate education to even understand these conversations. We just need to know the basic facts about, what percent of our energy comes from coal? What percent of our energy comes from nuclear? What are we actually talking about when we're talking about changing these systems, and what does that take? What is intermittent power? What is baseload power? We need that basic set of vocabulary, but we also need, if we're gonna do this transformation that we keep talking about, that I wanna see happen, we're gonna need a whole bunch of new skilled construction manufacturing workers and engineers. And those people are gonna have to be skilled in exactly those same kinds of basic and science and math and engineering skills that we need in general. So I'm really interested in the idea of sort of a new level of energy literacy or technical literacy around energy that could be the basis for someone going into career tech education or the basis for someone going into getting a PhD in engineering. That's the kind of baseline we're gonna have to have. China's politicians are all engineers, and I think you can see it when they make policy decisions. Our politicians are mostly lawyers and haven't had a lot of science background. And that makes a big difference in the kind of decisions we make as a society. So yeah, I'm all for climate education, or actually, honestly, energy education at a basic level.
We only have about 1 more minute left, so very quickly, I just want your opinion on what can a normal person do to make a difference here. I mean, we all come here. Obviously, the first thing probably isn't to fly across the country and go to a conference. So
what's
the biggest thing that we can do?
I have done terrible things in the last 3 days on the climate, so I actually feel really bad about it. I actually think that one of the first things we can all do, is start this conversation about divestment at a very personal level. Go to your 401k managers and find out what you're invested in. Go and find out what options you have if you're lucky enough to have a pension or a 401k. Find out what the institutions you work with in your college or your high school or wherever whatever institutions, your church, whatever institutions you're associated with, your pension fund, where are they invested, and start this conversation. And it doesn't have to be a conversation about just divesting, and I actually think that's not necessarily always a useful conversation. Have a conversation about where to reinvest. Take those monies out and put them in solar mosaic and invest in solar panels somewhere. Take that money out and change your strategy on where you're putting it, because you'd be surprised if you actually dig into your 401k how much of that's in oil and gas. So take it out of the check mark where you just have them manage it for you and try to put it in a sustainable fund. We just started this conversation at our organization, and it's hard. But I think that's something you can do personally, and if you do that, if we all do that, it's actually a significant amount of money that gets moved from one pot to another and gets put into new innovation and makes the case that we actually do support these technologies with our wallets as well as with our, moral fiber. So that's one of the first things I'd do.
Kate, I'm still not sure whether we should be optimistic, pessimistic, or fatalistic about the state of things, but you've sure pointed us in a lot of interesting and I think fruitful directions this hour. We talked about Keystone, we talked about plutocrats, we talked about evaluating the true cost of climate change, we talked about renewable energy revolution and climate education, and just a whole lot more. And I think in all of this, one thing is clear, and that's that we can't afford to continue to live in kind of bubbles of bad information. And I think the report that you're working on, the project that you're working on with Risky Business has a very important role to play in that. And I think we'll all be looking with great interest on that. So Kate Gordon, Vice President and Director of Next Generation in California. Thanks very much for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.